Okay, so this is the first big question. Who has, before you heard of this meeting, so like 6 months ago, raise your hand if you heard about the Verona Leper Colony. Before, wow. Okay, who's heard about it even since they were young? Just curious. Okay, well I was going to go around and ask you where you heard of it, but that's way too many. So we've all heard of it. Who wondered if it was true? Anyone ever wondered? You just know. Oh, so most people just kind of knew. Awesome. Well, good. So I keep asking myself this. I've been looking into this for the last year or so. Why is this so intriguing? And I think the size of this crowd kind of speaks to it. Something about a leper colony in your town is so darn interesting. Now, what is it? I want to know that. I want to examine it instead. So for me, I really love this quote. History is a puzzle. Nearly every piece is missing. Some are in attics, some are buried. This is what history is, especially at the local level. There's so many puzzle pieces to be discovered in Verona. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot in Williamsburg too, but they've got scientists on that. Here, there's so much opportunity to just dig in and find stuff that people haven't found before. And I love this. This is a puzzle. Figuring out, was there a leper colony? What do we know about it? It was all about finding puzzle pieces. My first piece, I guess, since I'm the speaker, I can talk about this a little bit, was I was walking by, when I was a senior in high school, 1997, I walked by East Warren Avenue and I saw this plaque. And that's what it looked like in 97. Gus's Diner is, actually this is the one you guys saw 10 minutes ago, but Gus's Diner is right here. And on this plaque said, dedicated to the people of these institutions, the asylum, the leper colony, and the poor farm. And something about that middle one really caught my interest. Leper colony? What? Where was it? Am I standing on it? Is my school built on it? What? Huh? And I just wanted to know, like, where is it? Well, what I did not know was 4 years earlier in 1993, this group of folks gathered there, 2 of them are in this room right now, to dedicate this memorial to the people who were in those 3 institutions, 400 of which are buried behind them. And if you know some of these folks, I'm going to put their names up. Gladys is here in the front, thank you for coming. Art is over there. And these folks, Jerry's kids are here. These folks did a lot of research in 1993, and they put it together into this packet. This is in the Verona Library. Also, it's on our website. You can go and read everything they found. They were doing this before Google, which is nuts. How did you do this before the internet? I have no idea. You pounded the ground, and you went out there. So this was the first puzzle piece I kind of found that mentions the leper colony. There's some interviews in there about people who remember it. Other pieces, in 2003, George Hesselberg, who just retired last year, I found out, bummer. He wrote a big piece on this where he found some old documentation about the leper colony. We have collected some oral histories. Who knew Walter? He's your uncle. Cool dude, right? He did something awesome we'll talk about. Newspaper Archive is my second family. This is my first family. My second one is newspaperarchive.com, because you can find so much in there, and I spent a lot of time with that site. And then I did do some pavement pounding myself. I went downtown to the Historical Society and found the old log book. This is pretty much actual size. Like, you could stop a bullet, a sword with this thing. This is everybody who was in the poorhouse, and you can actually touch it, look through it, and read it. It's amazing. Yeah, it's so cool. And then we have plat maps. We look through and compare. And then there's these random one-offs that you find. Like, this is Jerry standing in a field up on the ruins of a leper colony. And Jerry did a lot of work to gather those stories in 1993. Unfortunately, this picture was not GPS tagged. It was 93. I think this is a 2003 photo. So finding that site was part of the fun of putting this all together. And when I'm done today, the puzzle will look like this. No, actually, it'll look more like this. So just to set some expectations, most of the pieces are still missing. This is just, the ones we found happen to kind of fit, and every now and then you find one that tells you have the whole puzzle upside down, and you have to flip it. So this is what I'm trying to do for you all today, so I hope you're not disappointed. I should mention though, if my daughter was doing this puzzle, that thing would be done. Because Annie knows how to do herself a puzzle, isn't that right? Yeah. Okay, so why is it so intriguing? It's a puzzle. Also, leprosy. Really scary. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on Wikipedia. So everything I'm saying to you, I learned from the internet. Any actual doctors here? David's a doctor. You can correct me if I'm wrong. This is all stuff I've learned online. I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I figure we have to understand the disease before we understand the colony. Oh, thanks. I got my first light. Awesome. So leprosy is really scary. Oh, but Bruce, you got to turn it off or I'm going to panic. Okay. Thank you. Leprosy is really scary, and it's been around for a long, long time. They found evidence of this disease 2,000 years BC. So 4,000 years we've been dealing with this terrible disease. It's in the Bible. That's probably where a lot of us first heard leper. It has a recurring theme. Jesus heals a leper. Make me clean. You are clean. And it was cleansed. And there was kind of a connotation there in some of these old stories that leprosy isn't just something that happens to you. It's a symbol of you being unclean, of you being a bad person, of doing something to deserve it. And that's been around leprosy for a lot of human history. Also, it's scary. It's really scary. The physical reasons. I don't have too many slides of what it looks like, but something you need to know. It affects your appearance. You get skin granulomas. You lose sensation. Your cartilage gets dissolved. Your fingers shorten. Your nose disappears. Things happen to you that are really, really scary. It's disabling. You end up needing help for the rest of your life to do basic functions. You might lose fingers and toes because you can't feel them, so you bang into things, they get infected, and they have to be removed. I don't think they actually fall off. That's kind of a myth, but they shorten, they have to be removed. And for most of human history, including the time period we're talking about today, no one knew what caused it. You had no idea. Scary thing, horrible thing. And it was incurable for the time period we're talking about. And maybe today, I won't tell you that till the end. So there's the physical reasons, there's the social reasons. You become an outcast from society. In the Middle Ages, people had to carry around a bell like this and ring it if you were a leper, which leper is not the preferred term anymore. You're supposed to say persons affected by leprosy. I screw up and say leper a lot because it's faster. So forgive me if there are any in the room. But here we go. This is a painting from the Middle Ages where you have a rattle where you have to announce you're coming, so people know. So you are outcast from society if you get this disease. Here's back to the Bible. There's a whole long section, almost like a WebMD of 2,000 years ago, instructing a priest how to find if you're a leper or not. Number of lesions you should have. If you have scabbing, they talk about scabs. No idea. And if the priest determines you're leprous, you have to go around yelling unclean, and you have to live alone. So, big deal. And even King Edward III in the 1300s enacted laws to say you couldn't even come in the city limits. So if you get this disease, which you don't know how you get it, you don't know how to cure it, you're done. So I thought, when I started this presentation, I thought it'd be really cool to start with facts about leprosy. How is it caused? How is it cured? What do we know about it now? But then something in this sentence bothered me, we. And I think when telling a story, a historical story, there's always the bias to talk about it how you know it now. So if I said, these people had a disease, we threw them out in the field, and that's how we treated them, you'd be like, that's horrible. Like, we're looking at it through our lens today. So the goal, I think, is always to try to look at what they knew. So when we talk about the Verona Leper Colony, let's try to look through it through the lens of the people who were there. And it kind of makes more sense in a way when you realize it. So I'm not going to tell you all about leprosy until we get to the part in our timeline where people knew that. So, okay, basic Verona history timeline, just to kind of set the table. 1833, our land is surveyed. First white settlers living in a hole. Matt's family comes from the East Coast. Josiah Matz purchases half of downtown. The Matz house, which is still there and will have a public opening this spring, 1848. So where we're going to be today is from about 1890 to 1910. So this helps you put in perspective where we are. And then, well, if you needed help, we're over there to the right. But this is where our story is today. Now, this story starts with the Dane County poorhouse, 1854. Where was the Dane County poorhouse? Well, I could show you a map, but how about we fly?
I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky.
There's Cahoots. Oh, by the way, we were at the senior center. That's where we started. Here's Miller's. There's the Matt's house. Oh, we're heading out east. There's the fire department being built. And there is the park and ride. So everyone, no one got air sickness there? No one, we're all good? Everyone, that took me 2 hours. I hope you enjoyed it. This is where, apologies to my family, who have been very cool over the last few weeks. So there's a park and ride here now. This is where the poorhouse was. Gladys worked there in the 40s and 50s. Gladys
The poorhouse was on the south side of the highway.
Oh, what's that, Gladys? Go ahead.
The poorhouse was on the south side of the highway.
Yep. Would you say right about, they've actually got a plaque marking it right about here. The aerial photos indicate it was right about there.
Right about there.
Cool. Feel free to correct me on anything I say wrong, by the way, because...
It had a driveway.
Oh, you're good.
It had a driveway and it was lined with trees and for people to drive down through there.
And when did you work there? Was the
1946.
Right, and I think this one's been gone since the late 50s. So it was built because Dane County realized it had to take care of its sick, infirm, disabled, insane, elderly. And before this, they were contracting that out. They found out people were just taking the funds and not doing the work. So now they had to deal with it. So they built the original poorhouse, 1854. Here's the oldest photo we have of it. Gladys, please, yeah.
Also, a lot of times when the husband left and the wife had no means to take care of herself and the children, they went to the poorhouse.
Yeah.
And that's where the children grew up, like Lizzie Dorman and her brother.
I would love you to say some words about Lizzie, because Lizzie's in here, and you're going to learn about Lizzie Dorman real soon, and I learned a lot of it from Gladys. So you kind of mentioned, why were people there? I looked at the first 25 years of the poorhouse to really try to understand who was here, because I'm trying to find where they're buried. Side note, different presentation, but here are the most common reasons in that first 25 years. There were 850 people admitted there. Illness, mental, physical, being orphaned, children of other poorhouse occupants, being pregnant, or being abandoned by husbands. Kind of the classical reasons you would need help in the 1800s. Where were they from? This is that huge book now. Birth countries, fewer than half of them were from our country. Norway, Ireland. So it's a lot of immigrants. Here are some of the physical reasons people were in the poorhouse. And these are verbatim. I didn't rephrase these. Hoofed by a cow. Hit by a roof. Apparently they had a Wizard of Oz thing going on there. Lots of frozen feet. Some people were there their whole lives, like Lizzie Dorman we're going to hear about. Some people were in and out for a couple of days. They had influenza. They went into the poorhouse, they left. A lot of people had frozen feet, fever, blind on account of smallpox. There were mental and social reasons too. Everyone was mixed. Verbatim. I didn't make this up. So Aaron, you might do some time there. So these are actual written in hand. Some are pretty funny, but it kind of paints a picture of why people needed this help and they couldn't afford it, they couldn't do it on their own. Husbands, a lot of problems with husbands back then. Mother, father, a lot of people born in the poorhouse. So here's the poorhouse. Here we are today, 1882, 83. Oh, actually, I want to show you. Here's a plat map from 1861. I've left this on here for reference, the highway, and here's the main intersection of the Matt's house. There's where the poorhouse was. This is what the county owned in 1861, these blue areas. So you'll notice something's missing here. Dog park, not owned by the county, remember that. The county owned this area. Something showed up in 1882 across the street. What was it? Across the street. What used to be across the street on the north side? The Insane Asylum Hospital, yep. So 1882, they realized with people coming back from the Civil War, they wanted to separate the elderly, sick, poor from the insane and the criminally insane. Keep them in two separate buildings. So the asylum was built. Here is an old picture of that. I grew up with it looking kind of like this. This is from 2003, right before its demise. It did kind of have its heyday. I mean, this is, I think, 1981. Kind of looks nice. And, and it was torn down in around 2003, the front of it. So we have, now I want to kind of paint the picture of how people were seeing this disease in our time frame. I want to show you a 4-minute video. Who's heard of the Hawaii Leper Colony? This is one of the, this comes up over and over and over. It's mentioned in a lot of the documentation about our leper colony. So I want to give you 4 minutes of what was happening in Hawaii, which kind of, I think, speaks for the nation at this time. This is from Yahoo Video. It's just 4 minutes.
This is Abroad. The adventure starts now. The Hawaiian island of Molokai may look like paradise, but for over 150 years, this isolated piece of land was a prison for victims of Hansen's disease, also known as leprosy. In the mid-1800s, Molokai's remote Kaluapapa village was created to quarantine leprosy patients, many of them children, brought here against their will. The vast majority would never leave. I will say, it is so secluded. I mean, they must have felt totally forgotten by the rest of the world. With natural barriers like these 1,600-foot sea cliffs, getting here was hard enough, and getting out was nearly impossible. After descending to the village by mule, our guide Norman took us on a tour of the grounds.
January of 1866, the first patients were brought here. There were 9 men and 3 women in that boat.
So those first 12 people, they were just kind of like, here's some food, see you later?
There you go, that is correct. Some of the patients who were brought here to Kalabao did not want to come here. So they were put in the water forcefully. They had to swim to shore.
Thrown overboard.
And now we have to keep in mind, many of the patients who were brought here already were in weak condition. so they didn't make it to show. Only those strong did.
Those who survived the journey were among more than 8,000 patients who had called this place home over the years. Sister Alicia, a nurse by training, has seen much of it firsthand. She's been working with the patients here since 1965, over 50 years. If you arrive here as a 5-year-old with leprosy, what is your rest of your life supposed to be like? Like, you're supposed to grow old on the island? Or?
Absolutely. You were brought here to die.
Oh.
You were not able to leave the island. They were exiled here, and they were put here because the government didn't know how to control the disease at that time.
And the parents and the family couldn't come in?
That when the families came in, they stayed at the visitors' quarters. If you go down to the visitors' quarters, there's a longhouse that's there. On one side, you would have the patients. On the other side, you would have the family members. And it was separated by a chicken screen, and they were not able to touch each other.
Two of the colony's most important figures, Father Damien and Sister Marianne, were canonized as saints for their work turning shacks into houses, developing farms, and creating a school for the colony, which gradually improved living conditions for the patients.
This is so interesting. At first glance, you think, well, you know, I guess if you gotta go to a leper colony, this is the one to go to. Because from the outside, it looks like paradise. But then once you're here and you listen to the people, you realize that it's actually just a really beautiful prison.
Guards were even posted along the cliffs in case someone tried to escape. Did anyone actually ever escape from this island?
Yes, they did. Now here in Hawaii, I don't know about other parts of the earth, Hansen disease or leprosy patients were treated like criminals.
Yeah.
They were subject to arrest. If they did escape, bounties were put on them. Bounty hunters went after them.
Today, there are still a handful of elderly patients, now cured, who stay here voluntarily, a living legacy of this sad chapter in Hawaiian history.
Once you get to know who they are as individuals, as human beings, you know, your heart just goes out to them.
James Michener's
All
Hawaii
right, so let's see.
talks about Molokai.
Play it again. Oh, with the computers. What are you doing? It's your window. Okay. So that kind of sets, I think, perspective of how the world was seeing this disease. Two things she said. One is the government didn't know how to control this disease, so you had to do something before it spread everywhere. And the part about getting to know people and making them seem human, which is kind of what we're doing today in a way. So next up, okay. Before we get there, I want to mention an important date, 1873. Something big happened, something huge. I guess maybe come to the frog, I probably should have gone with something more like this. But Hansen, you've heard it maybe called Hansen's disease, discovered Mycobacterium leprae, thank you, which is the causative agent of leprosy. He was in Norway. He was in the worst part of Norway. There were 3,000 leprosy patients, the most in Europe, hence Hansen's disease. Now, this was controversial. No one had ever proven that a bacteria can cause an illness before. In fact, his mentor was the world expert on leprosy and said it was hereditary. And this guy married that guy's daughter. So, awkward Thanksgiving, I think. Hey, Pastor Gravy, by the way, your life's work is a lie. Hey, how about the camera? Interesting little side note. It's full of these little side notes. But scary, it didn't really help a lot of people because they still didn't know how it was transmitted. And people were still saying, okay, sure, it's a bacteria, but it's hereditary. So we've now made it to the 90s. So you've made it to the, the 1890s. Gotcha. These are all pictures from Verona around 1890 when we're telling our story. So here's what Verona looked like. By the way, just curious, raise your hand if you know who these people are. I expected fewer hands. It's probably the first time they've been on a screen projected in this room, I'm assuming. So now we're going to talk about the Verona leprosy patients. Where did they come from? Now we get into the specifics of what we know about them. It all starts in Bristol, which is just north of Sun Prairie. So everyone hold on to your seats.
Come fly with me, let's fly, let's
Woo, there's Madison, there's the capital, Sun Prairie. Bristol Township is where our story starts.
Exotic booze, there's a bar and far.
Now raise your hand if you know who that was.
Fly with me.
Really? More for the Spice Girls? Weird. I like how you roll. So this guy, Uranus Owen Brackett Wingate, was the, I'm glad I hear some laughing. Secretary, oh, by the way, this guy's information, I found his biography on a website dedicated to historical politicians with funny names. And I found his information nowhere else. So if his name wasn't silly, we wouldn't really know his story. Isn't that weird? Would that make sense to him? So he was the secretary of the Wisconsin State Board of Health, and in 1896, he was summoned by the Bristol School District to investigate 2 men there suspected of leprosy. He found them, Hans Yerda, 35 years old, and Thomas Larson. Now, a couple days ago, I went back looking for where these fellows might have been, and sure enough, on an old Bristol 1890 plat map, I found him. H.O. Yerda. Now, oh, you'll notice too, look how close to a school they are. So you can see why he had 4 kids. So you can see why if there's leprosy in a family and 4 kids are coming to school, people would kind of panic. I went and looked too to see what his house, this dot, this is what's there now. Look at that. I wonder, it makes you wonder, do they know that? Should I do it? Does he want to get that knock on the door? Do you not? I think it's cool. I mean, it'd be fun to know about history of the house, but I assume they like history because there's a train here. They're preserving an old train, which is pretty cool. So what do we know about these 2 folks? I don't have pictures of them, obviously, but Hans, 35 years old, married, 4 children, 6 months to 10 years. By this time, he'd already lost his larynx, and he was having trouble breathing. Thomas Larson, 46, married. He's already lost an eye, toes, and these are the words of Wingate. His hands were crippled in a manner as to render him unable to perform labor. So what does Wingate do? He fills in his report for the protection of public health, isolate them. He has a long list. Don't let them share towels, dishes, couches. He went into this IKEA-like list of things they shouldn't share. And don't let them share apartments. Also, this is a quote, wives should be persuaded to live apart, but the children are perfectly safe to mingle, so he let the kids continue going to school. And the Wisconsin Board of Health agreed with this assessment. And by the way, those quotes came from George Hesselberg's 2003 article, and what's kind of fun is, George finished his article by not knowing where they went. He found these lepers, and he kind of theorized, maybe they went to Verona, but he didn't know, and that's where his article ends. Well, we know that. We know the answer now. They come to Verona. Last Thanksgiving, at about 11 o'clock, I was doing a newspaper.com search, because that's what I do at night when everyone's asleep, and I found what I'm referring to as the article, the thing that really tied all this together. It was from 1897. The Racine Weekly Journal was republishing something from Chicago. Colony of lepers, 2 Norwegian families afflicted with the disease. Poor farm near Verona made to shelter the unfortunate. Death of 1 man and the birth of a baby to his widow. Holy cow. So now we have an idea. And this connects the Bristol leprosy patients to Verona. Now where did they go? Where were they in Verona? Okay, one more time.
You ain't nothing but
That's the last one, I promise.
you ain't gonna do
In a long time, neither do I pick a song. Dog park. I'll call it the dog park. It was not a dog park back then. It's a county park featuring dogs. Sorry, half of it's dogs. Thank you. Half of it's dog park. What would you call the other half? Just
Well, you're going to learn about it next week.
come next month and hear about this. Awesome. So around this time, this is 1899, I think. Here's today's map. Here's what the county owned. This had swelled up to be a fully functioning farm. They now had the south part. This is the dog park. So they had the dog park. But notice what they didn't have. They didn't have the north part. That's important. That was the Burmeister farm. And they didn't have what became later the gun range and is currently Scheidegger Park. That's important too. So they didn't have this. So we kind of know where these folks went because this is what the county had at this time. Here is the old map, just to prove it to you. Dane County owned these 2 40s. Burmeister still owned that. This guy still owned that. So they had to put these leprosy patients somewhere because they've been commanded to. Now this is a little bit of reading. I apologize. It's hard to I did summarize this, but here's what the article says. 2 cases of leprosy had appeared in Bristol, 2 Norwegians. The Norwegians, of course, had brought the disease from the old country. The people of the vicinity, this is a very doom and gloom article. Like, we are going to have a lazaretto, which is what they call leper colonies, in every city in the country if we don't take care of this. Terrible nature of the disease. The lepers mingled freely with their fellow men, exposing them all. And there was some kind of scare here. Now, people in America aren't from countries that have leprosy. A lot of them aren't. They don't have the degree of immunity. And they still say, so this is after Hansen's discovery, some people are still saying it's not contagious, but it's funny how everyone who works with And they actually mentioned the Hawaii leper colony here, saying they're all getting leprosy, so it's got to be contagious. Now this is a little look into these people's personalities. The lepers, they proposed a hospital in Bristol, but the lepers proved refractory. They refused to shut up. Their families refused to leave them. The lepers could, this is interesting, they could produce medical authorities stating the disease was not contagious and avoiding state regulations. I had to look up refractory. This is stubborn or unmanageable, mullish, pigheaded. So they didn't want to leave. These folks didn't want to come to Verona. They were forced to. In the midst of the quandary and the great, I just love that word, quandary, going through the people, the county interfered, and they were deported to the Dane County Poor Farm on a lonely piece of land far from house or high road, a cottage. So we keep thinking about what was this thing they lived in. I see it called a cottage over and over and over. I never see it called a house. By the way, the term colony was just generically used for any place you put lepers. So don't think of it has to be like, you think of a colony being a massive institution in like some other country. But and a cottage was built, there were 2 lepers and their wives who refused to desert them. How about for the hand for the lepers' wives for not leaving them? That's pretty cool. I'd like to think you would follow me to a leper colony. Sure. Okay, good. Tammy would be proud. So the wives stayed with them. A few more things. This is in 1897. One of them had already died. This was Yurda, we found out later, and given birth. Now, he had a 6-month-old when he went there, so I'm not sure if they gave birth there. It says he gave birth there, or if they were confusing the fact that he had a 6-month-old already. But kind of interesting looking at their lives. The county officials tried to send the widow back to Norway, offered her transportation. Here, take this money, just leave, but she wouldn't go. She stayed. And this article ends with what I would call a historical zinger, where they're saying, okay, she chose to stay and await the hastening time when she and her babe and the leper's wife make the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of Wisconsin lepers. That's a zing. I mean, this guy was writing this article not very happy with the situation. What's that? Oh, Lazaretto. Yeah, Lazaretto is a kind of an old-timey term for like a leper colony. That, there's another word. I can't think of it at the moment. Lazarus, thank you. Yeah, biblical reference. Cool. Missed that. So observations, they didn't want to come. There's no mention of their children coming here. Maybe they stayed in Bristol, and one of them died here in 1887. Where is he buried? That cemetery we talked about earlier was active during this time for the poorhouse and the asylum. He's not in there. He's not on the list. So he might be buried here in the park. It would make sense. And we got something about that coming up a little bit later. This guy, so our next, that's a puzzle piece. What's the next piece of evidence we found? This guy's Jesse Myers. He was one of Verona's Civil War veterans. He is my favorite local historical character. He had his hands in everything. He was the superintendent of the poor farm when this was happening. There he is in his office. Here's what he looked like in the Civil War. He was in our cemetery tour a couple of years ago. He, every year, had to fill out an annual report to Dane County for how their funds were being spent. On the back, they would itemize a list of expenses for the year, bigger ones. In the 1896 report, something very cool shows up. I'll blow it up so you can see it. Furnishing leper's house. And he spent $28.35. In today's money, that's about $780. This could have been the construction of a little structure in the woods. It's right there, and I'm really glad he wrote this down. I should mention, too, Gladys's group in 1993, they found mention of this, too. Their wording was a little different than this, so I think they found another reference to it. I haven't found that yet. So, 1896, they're here, they're in Verona, someone built or furnished something for them. Okay, so I want to throw in here real quick. Whoops. Let's see. Yeah, in 1902, I think this is a couple slides ahead, but 1902 there was a conference in Europe, I forgot to label properly, and they were basically decided, this is a worldwide leprosy conference, they decided in 1902 that yes, it's contagious, let's stop pretending this is hereditary, we should recognize it as a contagion, but all lepers are dangerous to their surroundings, they need to be dealt with appropriately. They still didn't know how it was transmitted. Okay, so we know there's a colony here now in Verona. What was life like there? What do we know about it? This is Elizabeth. Gladys knew Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a very interesting person. She was moved into the poorhouse when she was 10 years old in 1880. Her mother she had brothers and sisters, and they had to move there. They didn't have a father. And depending on the article, her mother either died shortly after or left town. I've seen it both ways. And she lived there until she died at age 98. So she was there her entire life from age 10. She never left. She taught herself to nurse, to help other people, to read. She learned from reading the Bible, and she remembered the colony. And actually, here she is. She became, I think, kind of a locally known person. Here she is with Miss Gaylord Nelson and with Madison's First Lady on an article in one of her birthdays. Now, you know this person. So here's the 1993 group. Gladys, this is you, right? I got the right person? We've never met in person until today, so just really careful with that. Gladys sat down and interviewed her. Well, actually, sorry, Gladys recorded a story in 1993 about talking to Lizzie. Lizzie died in 1968, I think. I'll just read this. I met her in 46 at the old Dane County home. She was quiet, simple, reserved, and loved to visit. She talked about her work to the home, about carrying food from the home to the Leper Colony, located 1.5 miles south. That's right where the dog park is. So they were bringing food to these folks. And if you think about it, Wingate's report said he was too crippled to do work, his hands, you know, so you'd have to take care of them, bring them stuff. What's weird is they're not in the logbook of the Dane County Poor Home, that huge book. They kept them off the grid or off the maps there. And I guess technically that's a register of people in that poor home. I kind of thought I'd see them there, but I did not see them there. So we know, thanks to Gladys recording Lizzie's story, that people were bringing them food and supplies. There's also some articles about Lizzie. Every time she had a big birthday, she was in the paper, it seems. She took care of those cases others were afraid to go near, and patients were just dumped at the home in other agencies. That sounds familiar. It sounds just like our Bristol patients. So other little puzzle pieces. So who knew Harlan? You knew Harlan? A lot of people knew Harlan. He was town chairman for a while. He was on that 1993 committee as well. Oh, should not be an E? Thank you. Okay, I see a lot of head shaking. Sorry. I didn't have most, I won't tell you how late at night this was mostly done, but my bad. So he knew Rudy. Any of Rudy's relatives here today? Rudy's got some relatives still in town. Rudy Roethlisberger, he had talked to Harlan, and Harlan recounted a story from 1942. Rudy said he could vividly recall the Leper Colony, which is located just off of what is now Highway PD. He wrote PD, but I think that was a mistake. Or sorry, he wrote PD, but I think it's PD because nothing was over on PD. Sorry, I put the wrong one there. South of the Dane County Pork Farm, as it was called in those days. He stated on several occasions he saw the food and supplies being conveyed to there from the south side of the highway. So again, another story of bringing food there to take care of these people. Transportation being what it was, there was a special buggy used to deliver food. When the buggy arrived at the wooden gate, the food and supplies were lifted over the gate, and the people came and took it. They didn't touch, kind of like in Hawaii, there's stories about people visiting through a screen. So we have another puzzle piece. We can kind of start to see what it was like to be here. You were totally reliant, or at least, I shouldn't say totally, partially reliant on support from the poorhouse. Also, this is interesting. It was believed at the time the people who lived in the colony took care of the grave digging and the burial of their own. This explains why they're not in our cemetery. It also means we have some things to look for in the dog park, if you know what I mean. So 1910, there has been another land acquisition. This is the part of Prairie Marine that's not a dog park right now, but it's two, I guess, 80-acre parcels. There's Highway and MPB. Another little story we have. These were the Batkers, William Batker family. We had his family here a year ago to talk about George Batker, our blacksmith, and their family, they had an old, first off, here it is. So here's the farmhouse. This is right about where the UW swap shop is. It was demolished to make that road. Here's the, man, Johann Joachim Heinrich Wilhelm family. Awesome name, around 1904. Now in that picture, here's Walter. I mentioned early, there he is as a boy. He did something awesome. In 1987, he typed up a 5-page autobiography of his time growing up on this farm. And in there, we find another puzzle piece. One of the things I recall doing, now he's 10. He's 10 in 1910. About 10-year-olds, more or less, going over the big hill. This helps us locate where this was, a hill. He went over a hill. At the south end of the farm to the old leprosy house, which is on Dane County property. It was when he was 10. It was occupied by a leper in the late 90s, so this is a guy who was there right after this place started, in the remote place, in at the edge of the woods. They brought him, there it is, bringing him needed food, clothing again. I think, I want Duncan to read this, I think we were forbidden to go there, but the spirit of adventure was just too much to resist. You're 10 and there's a leper house over the hill. Heck yeah, I'm going there, Mom. I mean the library. Isn't this cool? What a cool document this is. Other things. By 1910, it was being used as a storehouse by the squirrels and woodchucks. They probably should have burned it down when he died. Now, this is fun. Life at the Leper Colony. They claimed one of the nearby farmers did visit him occasionally for a game of cards. His name was Charlie Hack. I remember him well. Where was Charlie? Charlie was right there. So we have a story now of a farmer going in there and interacting, playing cards. Yeah, which was up until 1901. I'll tell you why in a second. Okay, so here's our timeline. We got our leprosy conference in Berlin. I'm just going to start filling things in now. These are articles I found that are one-offs that just kind of fit the timeline. 1900, there was an article in the State Journal saying there's one leper left, he's living in the woods. Well, we know Yurda died in 97, so we're down to just Larson now. Another article, 1901, there's one person living there alone with one attendant. Is that his wife? I don't know, or did they have someone there living with him? And he's blind. So I'm guessing the card playing was before the state. You just try to put these pieces together in your head, you know? Now, this is something that Paul found for me. They got his name wrong here, not Paul's. Thomas Nelson. It's Larson, or yeah, did I screw that up? Hansen, sorry. Hansen. I've been saying it wrong myself the whole time, I apologize. Andy will fix that in post, I'm sure. Don't worry, Andy, you don't have to. Thomas Nelson, it's actually Hansen. I was saying it wrong, is the only leper in Dane County, has been afflicted, has died. So he died in 1902. And I mentioned I forgot to point out, thanks to Walter's story, by 1910 we know the house is in ruins. And then when we find these other pieces, they kind of fit. Well, yeah, one guy died in 97, one guy died in 1902, and by this time the house is being used by squirrels and woodchucks. So this is, one more piece here. In 1902, there was a report done of all the leprosy patients in the country. Every state had a report. There's a section in Wisconsin that had about 6-7 people in there, and our Yurda is in there, as far as I can tell. He died in 1997. He was married, 4 children. It all fits. He came around 1884 and showed slight symptoms. This is a little bit sad, but his general condition towards the end was bad. And there were more or less complaint in the community concerning the methods of quarantine pursued. So people weren't happy that he was there. I guess you can imagine if there's a leper house built right next to your 40 acres, you're probably not happy about that. So if we were to take this literally, it was kind of tough on them. People did not want them there. His life was not made more tolerable by such unnecessary complaints. Okay, so that's what we know about the timeline. That's from start to finish of this particular colony. Now, what's fun is trying to figure out where this was exactly. We know it was in the dog park, but where in the dog park? There's 80 acres there. Right? 80? Someone? Ish, okay. Here's the picture of Jerry. Jerry knew where it was. Jerry had talked to enough people who knew people, or like Walter, who had seen it themselves. Jerry went out and took this picture. I got this through a third person who had kind of a tangential connection to the whole thing. And it's Jerry, but where is it? Where is this? The George Hesselberg article showed the lower 40, that's the dog park, and this is as close as he got. And George had seen it. I'm wondering if Jerry didn't take him out there. He didn't say Brown there. It was probably Jerry, I'm guessing. Where is this? So, how many hours did we spend crawling through the weeds this spring? I'll let my wife answer this.
Me or you?
Start with you, then I'll add mine.
Like 2?
Okay, so she spent 2 hours crawling through the weeds with me, trying to find a rock pile. Now, along the fences, there's plenty of rock piles. What do farmers do with rocks? Throw them in the corner by the fence. But these rock piles are not by the fence in that picture, and that's what I assumed. So this is a 1937 aerial photograph. The dog park, the 911 tower is over here somewhere. The path goes like this, and there's these 2 spots there. There's a couple spots other places that look like trees, and we looked at those. We crawled and crawled and crawled and crawled through things, looking for rocks. Didn't find any ticks, thank God, I don't think. Couldn't find them. There's those 2 spots. I talked to Dane County Parks. Darren Marsh is the head, really cool guy, really into history, really supportive of these efforts. And he showed me they had taken a LiDAR image in 2009. If you were here at our Indian Mound session 2 years ago, you remember LiDAR is lasers that can see through vegetation, so you can see changes in elevation on the ground that you can't see with your eyes. He said, well, I think there's 3 places that could be the remains of a leper colony. Here's 2 spots there, here's kind of a 90 degree, here's this long slash. So I went out there, I crawled through weeds here, I couldn't find the darn thing. I talked to Diane and Darlene to say, did your dad ever bring you to there? He didn't, huh? He never You don't bring your kids to leper colonies? I bring mine. I've been there. But yes, you had other things to do like Yahtzee, I don't know. So I've been out there digging and digging. Now, there was this amazing moment for me. There is a group called the Prairie Moraine Friends. David is with us, who's the head of it. They are volunteers who help maintain this park, and they've got big goals about really getting some of the invasive species out, putting in a little theater area. They work with Darren Marsh, and Darren said, oh, he found someone who knew where this was, and he talked to David and them and said, hey, would you mind clearing the scrub away from it? And they did this back in November, and this amazing site showed up, which is almost rectangular. It really looks like a foundation to the non-archaeologists, and hopefully the archaeologists too. So David and his group, big thanks to you guys, put up stakes, because as soon as they cleared it, people started picking up rocks and walking off with them, which we needed them to stay there, so they protected the site. And for me, I didn't cry, but I'm not gonna lie, I got close. After looking for this place for a year and then to walk out and see it even looks like a foundation, I couldn't believe it. And by the way, me and Aaron, we crawled through on our hands and knees, like right up to here. We were so close. I mean, David, this was pretty thick, wasn't it? We like, there's an intersection here. We remember coming up here, there was a puddle there. We got so close to this thing, we didn't even know where it was. So since Jerry's 2003 photograph, a lot has grown up. Here's another picture of their stakes. They're protecting it right now. Okay, now we get the professionals. Mr. Reckner over there, who was our guest a year ago talking about digs. He's a State Historical Society archaeologist and interested in a lot of local history kind of opportunities. We had him come out there in January to just, with your trained eye, does this look like a foundation or does it look like a pile of rocks? Pile of rocks everywhere. Of course, that morning it snowed, so he couldn't really see the rocks, but you know, you do what you can. And Paul, and you can, and maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I tried to summarize, I watched the videotape, I tried to summarize, is it a structure, is it a pile of rocks? I should mention, by the way, we can look back at this going back to 1860, before the county owned it, and the parcels where there's a farmhouse, there's a little dot. You can see it on every one of them. Not this one, and a couple others. So there was, when they surveyed it in 1861, they didn't put a dot for a house on there. So I'm thinking it was probably maybe just owned, farmed, whatever. So if there wasn't a house there before that, then the county's owned it since around that time. You're not going to build a house on county land. If you built a structure, that kind of builds our theory that this could be the leper house. Is it a structure or a pile of rocks? Well, you look for rocks with tool marks. You look for mortar cement remains. You look for building materials, plaster. We didn't find any of those things on this day in November, which was a little bit of a bummer. We were hoping to just be like, oh yeah, this is a leper colony. I've seen this before. Picks up a rock and shows it to me, no. But Paul did determine it's interesting and requires further study, because you can only tell so much from just looking at it. Huge question, is there metal there? If this was a structure, whether it burned down, got destroyed, decayed, there'd be metal. Is it there? Well, to survey a site, there's a process you need to follow with multiple levels of approval. And Paul and Katie isn't here, is she?
No, I don't think Katie.
Okay, so they're both archaeologists. They're actually doing this process for us right now. They are filling out the forms to get, and they're doing this in their free time. They're not hired, this isn't part of their job, it's community outreach to come out and help communities with stuff like this, which is amazing. They're actually trying to get permission to do an actual legit dig here. Is there metal? If it was a house, there should be metal. So, you guys know anyone with a metal detector? Rich from last month. There's Rich, our last month's speaker. It's just sometimes you feel like a higher power is putting the puzzle together. We just met this guy who's great at metal detecting. We went out there with him last Sunday, and I'm going to play you, I'm almost done, so sorry if it's going kind of long, but there's a 3.5-minute video I want to play you guys to see. Now, remember, if he doesn't find metal, doesn't mean it wasn't a structure, but it means it probably wasn't, because there should be metal there. He finds metal, you hear that thing chirp, and now the story continues. So I'm going to play you a 3-minute, 3.5, 4-minute.
We have forecast.
Here we are. There's Duncan. You gotta bring your kids when you do anything else. There's dogs. Dogs love checking out the site. They help us keep it lubricated.
It didn't know what kind of metal it is, and if there's metal or if there's something else. But we have to somehow tell the computer to ignore the grounds.
So do you typically, on a site like this, if this was a house, are you looking for nails? What kind of stuff are you looking for here?
Well, I mean, any piece of metal associated with either building materials or in this era, like lots of domestic objects were made of metal. Pots and pans, right? Clocks,
silverware.
furniture, yeah.
And some of that stuff just persists, it doesn't rust away or erode away.
Not in this time frame we're looking at. You know, I mean, there'll be a lot if we do have any.
Quick side note, we got permission to metal detect, but not dig or put down flags. That you need the form for that. But we got permission from Dane County Parks to just metal detect and see if there is metal, but we couldn't, if we were to find some, we can't dig. Not yet.
It's domestic occupation here. There'll be stuff, that's for sure.
Yeah, iron. So there's going to be nails here. That's usually an indication it's a building.
There's a beam.
Here.
Wow.
It's mostly in the 20s, so that's another piece of iron.
Found something. Wow.
That's in there too. There's 48.
Found something, Jeff.
That's a good signal, but it's so close to the surface that it could be a piece of trash that's blown in.
Yeah.
Now here's something that's a little bit softer and a little higher. I'm seeing 70s and 80s in here. So this one, this is the better signal. I would definitely dig that one over this one. You know what this sounds like?
Oh, we did find something, and I had to resist the urge to pick it up. It's a metal strap of some sort.
74. It's like a half.
Yeah, I picked it up. Don't tell anyone. Oh, close your eyes.
Yeah, there's something here.
Oh wow.
This is 70 something. 70. That's a pretty good signal. But too bad we don't have permission to dig yet.
What was that?
The detector is going into an overload mode because the signal is so strong. So watch this. That's a good signal, but as I get closer, hear that?
Yeah.
So it's in overload.
What does that mean? Just
It
huge?
means that the target is very large. So there's a big chunk of iron right in here. See, it's a very solid 20, 29.
Yeah.
So right in here, there's a big chunk of iron.
Okay, let's see.
It could be a shovel.
Uh-huh.
Axe head, shovel, axe head.
He found metal! He found lots of metal! He found big pieces, little pieces. He found metal! So that was music to our ears. They found metal. Wow, that's great. Okay, so, all right, head on back over to wrap up. So this is kind of a in-progress thing right now. There's these two sites. Weird, so there's two sites. You didn't see the other one. The lower site, actually in the middle of the rocks, has a curved out area like someone's excavated, which, I mean, Paul mentioned, you usually don't go through the work of digging a hole unless you have a reason, maybe a cellar or something. And weird, probably coincidence. Do you remember that picture on the plaque from the 1993 group? I don't know where that came from, it's an artist etching. There's two cottages shown there. The lower one has a cellar, and the top one does not. And our holes, the lower one has, okay, that's gotta be coincidence, but just too awesome. I was like, oh my God, that one's got a cellar. And that matches our, I haven't called Peckman to see if anyone remembers where that came from. Yep, so there we are, we found metal. There's the thing that we didn't pick up. It's a piece of metal that looks like maybe something around a barrel to keep a barrel together. Who knows, it's been there a while. And that, Paul, do you wanna say just a word or two? Or not to just throw you on the spot, but is there anything I said wrong?
No. I think maybe just sure. So looking forward, as Jesse said, my colleague and I are working on following through with getting the permissions to do some initial excavations at the site. Hopefully this spring, midsummer, we're hoping. I think all signs look really promising. This really looks convincingly like someone was living out there, and our next goal really is to try to find artifacts on the site that we can associate with the occupation and hopefully date to that period of 1880, 90-ish to the early 20th century. And so that's going to be the contribution that archaeology can make. We're not going to be able to prove this is the leper colony, unless. Obviously, we're not going to find a finger. We're hoping. But
Fingers?
right. That really gets things. Everything gets complicated if we find body parts. So rather not. but we can find artifacts, that would be associated with a domestic household from that period, and hopefully date them accurately enough that we can say, sure, someone was living here. Someone had a domestic residence during the period when we believe the leprosy patients were sequestered here, right? So that's kind of our next big goal. I don't know, do you want to talk about the ground penetrating radar at this point? So possibly longer term, because of what the research that Jesse has found or has been doing, and the lack of evidence for any leprosy patients who were buried at the main cemetery during that period, there is the possibility, right, that there are 1-2 burials out there that we would also like to locate. And for that, we're probably going to rely on a friend of ours, a colleague who has access to ground penetrating radar systems that can sort of sense disturbances in the soil. And that's one good way to start to try to locate features like burial shafts, right? And with the idea that if they are present, if we can locate them and determine their existence, then for long-term use, right, this helps Dane County Parks with sort of planning, right, future developments of the site and protecting the site itself, over the long term as well. So that's kind of our three-pronged approach to this, which is really exciting. I think this is a really unique piece of local history that we have a rare opportunity. It's in a Dane County Parks location. It is protected by laws and the park system as well. So we don't have to worry about it potentially being destroyed as long as park visitors are responsible, right? But it really gives us a great opopportunity to investigate it and interpret it for the public over the long term. So that's great. Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
By the way, we put the piece of metal back. Here he talks about park visitors not destroying the site. We put the piece of metal back. Can we just give Paul and Katie a round of applause? They're doing this for free. Everything you saw in there was just on the weekend in their spare time. And all this, they're just doing this because they love it, and that's awesome. And everybody, we're lucky. Dane County Parks, Prairie Marine Friends, Wisconsin Historical Society, everybody wants this to happen and is supportive. There's no one being like, oh, get off my land. It's just great to have this come together. That's the end of my talk. I definitely want to open up for questions, but I have to mention something. Some of you may have noticed. This was part 1. I left something out. There are pieces that don't fit the puzzle. There is a documented oral history of further activity with leprosy patients in Verona after the 1910s. There, in that 1993 packet, there was stuff about this area. There was also stuff about what's now Shadier Forest. This was the gun range starting in the I don't know when the gun range started, but the county owned this back around 1910-ish, right around the time the other leper colony was ending. And we know people were complaining about it over there. There are stories. Anyone know Vernon Doubler, or some of the Doublers? Vernon told a story. He had a farmer, his dad had a farm down here at the north end of Paoli. He remembers seeing lepers walking from the poorhouse to here, working a pump there, watering some cattle, coming to his dad's farm, watering cattle, fishing, eating lunch, and going back to the poorhouse every day. And there's another story about that too. Now, whether they were leprosy patients, infectious diseases. So there was something happening in this park as well later on. He said that was 1937. He remembers those people going back and forth. Also, in one of the articles about Lizzie Dorman, the woman who lived at the poorhouse her whole age, they talked about how she took care of the leprosy patients. But one article also says she took care of leprosy patients, or lepers, I'll just say that's what we call it, who lived in tiny shacks next to the poorhouse. Now when I saw that, I thought, this is one of those puzzle pieces that's from a different puzzle. It like kind of fits, but it's a different color. I'm starting to think that at some point, this was gone. Where the poorhouse is, am I pointing in the wrong place? Way up, sorry, yeah, in front of a crowd, not the best. So at some point, we have the story about lepers living at the poorhouse, but walking to Scheidegger Forest, the gun range, doing something there, eating lunch, fishing, going back, and then we have this other thing saying that Lizzie took care of people who were in sheds on site. So I'm thinking maybe at some point they started keeping them there in some kind of temporary structural housing or something. Or maybe there was another colony here, and that actually I left out of this talk because I knew it was going to go long, and it was midnight last night, so maybe that'll be another one in the future. And a lot of you heard that story about the fishing poles and the lines. That was here. So maybe, I don't know, if I find more puzzle pieces, we'll do something on that one. So more activity later on. Also, one other little thing that didn't quite fit that I kind of glossed over. Let's see, the story. Who was the guy who had the story about the special wagons? You remember?
Walter.
No, it wasn't Walter. It was, sorry, blanking in front of a crowd. Yes, Rudy Roethlisberger's story about seeing those special wagons bringing food to, well, PB. He said PD, but I think that they typed that wrong. I found out late last night he didn't move here until 1920. And I talked to his daughter, Ruth Himsel, and asked if there was any reason he'd be in town before 1920, and she said no. I think that the leper colony we're talking about might not have been the last one to happen in this area. We know that when they bought the Burmeister property, there was a house there. We know in 1900 they installed a well on it because I found that in those files downtown. So maybe they moved them from the house that Walter saw, maybe to that farmhouse, maybe they kept it going. So Rudy, it's like every now and then you find that piece that you realize the puzzle's upside down. That was one of those moments. I was like, oh crap, that doesn't fit my timeline. Okay, well, you follow the evidence and you make a new timeline. So there's more activity after, but I thought for this talk, I'd just focus on the dog park because it's timely, there's things happening, but to be continued. Yeah, question?
Jesse, I just wanted to mention, you were saying that they said PD on that one slide.
Yeah.
Around 1950, I was told that they changed, it was PD, and they
serious?
changed it to PB. They switched with the PD and the
This
PB.
was PD? Oh, that's
so that is
great.
actually how it was.
On the old plat maps, they don't.
And someone here should know about
Anyone
that.
else? Anyone else know that? Like, was this ever called PD? Can anyone else confirm that too? I saw another head shaking. Yeah.
Well, I'll add a little more information, not about the name of the road, but the old road, what's now.
What's now PB, going over the moraine, is a relatively new road. That was built in about the 1930s when cars got more powerful and trucks and could actually climb up the moraine and then, go down it with brakes and come up from the other side. Before that, it was a more winding road, and if you go along the Ice Age Trail just west of the park, we uncovered the road, the old farm road, and we have a sign up that says this is the old farm road.
Did it say PD on it?
No, it doesn't. It was just called the old farm road or something like that. And it was abandoned in around 1920, 1930 when cars got more powerful.
Thank you, David. I did notice that on these old aerial photos. I did notice that this road used to go off in this direction, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they straightened at some point.
Yeah.
But the Rudy Roethlisberger story ostensibly would be after 1920, which means more activity here later on. Ken, please.
Peripheral information, but
yeah.
I don't know when PD became PD. I don't know when PD became PD, but I don't know, maybe in the 40s. My grandpa used to grade and snowplow the town roads. And it was a town road. PD was actually a town road. And so I don't know when it became a county road, maybe the 40s. I don't know if anyone else here would know that, but I don't know if that kind of fits in. There was no PD in olden days.
Okay, so even PD is.
Yeah, it was a town road.
Great. So I guess, do you guys have questions? Do you want to hit the birthday cake some more, or anyone have questions? We got an expert over there. We've got local history experts. Yeah, what's your question? Okay, you guys on the mic. Come on, sorry.
I talked with Jerry Mauer probably 1992, and he told me that when he was a young boy, I don't know when that would have been, that he rode on a wagon out to the leper colony to deliver vegetables from the farm. He rode on a wagon with his dad. So I don't know when Jerry would have been a little boy, if that fits in the timetable at all.
He was born in 30.
Yes, that's what he told me.
He was born in 30.
Steve Sheets.
Thanks, Steve.
You got here, right here. She was born in 30.
He was born in 1930?
Yeah.
Jerry was? So that fits Vernon Doppler's 1937 era story. Cool, thanks for sharing that. Cool, other questions? Oh, question, David?
I wanted to thank you for the information about leprosy, and if your story about people's beliefs about leprosy sounds odd, think about in our own time when we discovered what AIDS was in 1980. If you remember, originally the cause of AIDS was not understood, and it was related to being from a certain country, Haiti. People from Haiti were the ones that were bringing AIDS in, which of course is a mistake. It was also related to certain behaviors, sexual behaviors, like if you were homosexual, you were the one who caused AIDS to develop or brought AIDS in. And of course that was a mistake too. It has nothing to do with being homosexual, it's just sexual activity. And so we still make mistakes currently, even with all the modern science we have about how these things start and how they are spread. And so it's understandable before anybody knew even what a bacteria was, that there would be all sorts of stories about leprosy and stuff.
I should mention, David actually is a doctor. Wikipedia, medical degree. Listen to that. Thank you for. So other quick questions or? Oh, John. John Shearer's got a question. Go, John.
I don't really have a question, but I will say this. I'm Jerry Mauer generation. And I remember as a young teenager, my friend Bill Schutz, who's now deceased, and I, on more than one occasion, bicycled from Verona out to the Leper Colony. We did it as because it was a kind of an adventure, even though we were told not to go near there. And but of course, when you're told not to go near there, you got to go near there. So we did, and more than one occasion, I would say 3 or 4 times, we did not see any lepers. I did not see a building, but there was a road, there was a driveway going from what would be now PV up to a fence and a gate, and I remember going up to, riding up to the gate, and we would look in cautiously, of course, and I don't know how long we would stay there and so on, but I would have to say we didn't ever see anyone, nor did I ever remember seeing a structure. There may have been one. I'm talking 14 years old, so, you know, that's a while ago, for my memory. The only other thing I wanted to comment on was I was familiar with the Poor Farm. Some of the residents of the Poor Farm, as some of you know, my parents ran the Eagle's Nest in downtown Verona, which was a bar and a restaurant. And some of the residents at the Poor Farm would come into town, walk into town, and come in for a glass of wine or a glass of beer. And we got to know several of them. Pearly Blue was one. We had a fellow, if anybody did read the book Down at the Nest, a fellow by the name of Hub, who lived there, and his back was fused so that he couldn't sit. He had to stand or lay down. And so when he came to town, he rode on the running board of a car or a truck who would pick him up on the highway and bring him into town, and somebody would do the same to take him home. And he would stand at the end of the bar because he couldn't sit on a stool. But that was my father-in-law then began working at the Poor Farm. And so occasionally he needed a ride to the farm and to the Poor Farm. And I would take him down, and so I would go in and see it. It was somewhat grim, I would say, although the dining area was pretty nice, I thought.
Was this the original one or the one where Farm and Fleet is?
No, it's the original one.
Original one, okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I do remember the Poor Farm pretty well. I didn't get all through the whole thing, but I did see the lobbyway and some of the rooms and where some of the fellows hung out.
Do you remember how close that fence was to PV? Was it right there or was it?
It wasn't right there, no.
Okay.
It was kind of up the hill, as I remember. It was a little bit of a grade. I would say it was probably maybe 100 yards from the road,
Okay.
something like that.
Cool. Well, thanks, John. And John, I know you mentioned in your book that if you went farther south than the railroad tracks, you got in trouble with your parents. This is way farther than that. John, risking life and limb to tell us that story today. Thank you. Cool. Oh, Paul. Yeah, Paul, do you want to add something real quick? There you go.
I wonder if there's interest in knowing where.
So I just thought with all this talk about leprosy, so I'm not an MD by any means, but maybe David can back me up on this. So as an archaeologist, I did a little bit of research when we started to think about the prospect of digging on the site that was formerly occupied by leprosy patients, right? So best current research I can find, leprosy, the bacillus that causes leprosy can only exist outside of the human body for 30 to 60 days maximum. So there is no risk of contagion, from bringing your dog to the dog park, in the future.
But don't tell people that. We don't want them to disturb the site.
Right. Maybe just keep that, But just so we don't start, we need to stay away from that dog park. There's leprosy there, yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, there is leprosy there. Don't go in the flags. All the leprosy's in the flag. John, I tried to find Pearly Blue and Hub on our cemetery map because in your book you mentioned that. But they don't put people by their nicknames on cemetery plat maps, so I couldn't find them. If you ever remember what their actual names are, let me know. I want Pearly Blue Hub. Well, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. If you haven't signed a sign-up sheet, yeah, is there another? Oh, we're gonna hand up real quick. Sorry. Who did?
I think
Gladys, please.
There also was a barn down near what was the poorhouse, and that burned in 1944. And that was lit by a mental patient that was out walking around the grounds, and I remember of that fire. And it was in the afternoon.
Were you working there at the time?
No.
Can you just tell us just a quick sense about Lizzie Dorman? And what do you remember about Lizzie?
Well, as I said, Lizzie was very simple, but she also talked about taking food from what was prepared at the poorhouse and walking down to the Leper Colony, and she would leave it there someplace, and then these lepers would come and pick up the food.
Oh, this is cool. Thank you. I almost feel like I know her a little bit after reading your account. But okay, real end this time. Thanks everyone. Come sign up and join our mailing list.